Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Linda Levy, president of the Fragrance Foundation, and in the next segment, I have the great pleasure and honor of interviewing a very special person. Today, you're going to be meeting Dr. Pamela Dalton from the Monell Center, and she's going to introduce herself first, describe what she does, and then we're going to get into some very interesting topics that are the connection between smell and real life every day and real life during COVID. So Dr. Pamela, please say hello to the world and tell them what you're actually doing.
Hi, greetings, Linda. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this experience. I really appreciate it and always appreciate the opportunity to talk about my favorite subject, which is our sense of smell. I am a scientist at the Monell Center in Philadelphia. Now, the Monell Center began as a small basic research institute studying the role and the function of smell and taste over 50 years ago. Back then, there were many research institutes devoted to vision and hearing, but none devoted to the chemical senses. We've grown into a world-renowned center for studying not only the function of these systems, but how they affect our everyday experience, our health, our food choices, and our well-being. I'm one of over 40 scientists at the center engaged in basic research. I joined the center in 1993 as a postdoctoral fellow and became so enchanted with the role that our sense of smell plays in our lives and how beneficial it is when it works and how disruptive it can be when it fails. And so I'm really pleased to be here with you today to talk about the way we use our sense of smell, what it means to us both emotionally and in our health and well-being, and what happens under special circumstances when we lose it.
Thank you. You know, it's an interesting time that we are in, and I know from my perspective from the Fragrance Foundation, we always talk about the sense of smell. We always value the sense of smell. It's such a big part of our lives in the fragrance community. But what seems to have happened in the rest of the world pre-COVID, the other senses get a lot of attention for a lot of different reasons. And I think a lot of people take for granted the sense of smell. However, now that we're all staying home, and we're going to talk about that a little more at the end, people have revalued even how their homes smell and all the smells that go on in their life. So we're going to get right to it. And I think the connection between this particular time is rather interesting, and it's really heightened the importance, and it's really on the sight of everyone in terms of what the sense of smell does. So as a little intro as well, could you please tell us the types of studies that you've performed on cognition, emotion, and the way people basically perceive odors?
Happy to talk about that. I've conducted, and my lab has conducted, many studies showing how expectations and our internal emotional state about an odor can completely change how one perceives that odor and how it makes you feel. Sometimes we have induced different emotions in participants and then had them smell and respond to different odors. And sometimes we induce different expectations by telling participants, for example, that the odor is a natural versus synthetic fragrance, and asking them what it smells like, how pleasant it is, and how it makes them feel. Now, interestingly, people in mildly anxious states are much more aware of odors in their environment. And if people think a fragrance has a beneficial effect, they often report more sensations of wellness than if the fragrance hasn't been characterized. Similarly, if they think an odor or a fragrance might be harmful, then they tend to report feeling less well in the presence of the odor. So what we've learned over many years of these kinds of studies is that odor perception is influenced by a lot of things that have nothing to do with the odor itself. Our mood, our previous experiences with that odor, and our expectations. And it's not static over time. The context that we find ourselves in will often determine what we think of a particular odor. So something that is pleasant in one context may be considered intrusive or not pleasant in another. So it's a very, very dynamic system.
That is very interesting. And right now, within the fragrance community, we speak about a lot that you just referred to. It seems from everything that I'm hearing, the reason that fragrance is evolving and growing as a category in the last year, since last March, is people are using it for different reasons. And I'd love your reaction to that before we get into some other terminology. One thing that is absolutely definite is people are embracing fragrance for self care. Everyone who used to go to spas or go out for a massage or a facial is now doing that at home. And the entire experience, taking a bath, taking a shower, applying moisturizer, or the big requirement of washing their hands more frequently than ever, which so we're calling this whole sort of usage self care, has become a very big additional piece into many people's lives or expanding. What's your perception of how that part of the world of scent or odors, as you call it, is really affecting people today?
Belinda, I think it's inevitable that people would gravitate towards a sensory experience like fragrance, not only for self-care on their bodies or when they're taking a bath, but also to scent their home as well. This is a very easy way for people to shift their mood almost instantaneously because of the emotional reactions we have to fragrances that we love or enjoy or associate with other pleasant experiences that that are not happening right now, or we're not able to have right now because we're isolated from people that we love and places that we might want to travel to. So this is a very real and fundamentally sound way of bringing a mental health component into your life with fragrance, whether it's the shampoo that you use, whether it's the way you scent your bath water or the way you scent your home. And in fact, I think people are actually experimenting with new fragrances in this world because staying at home so much of the time gives us the opportunity to change our scent palette and revive our ability to enjoy these scents. Because when we know that when we're continuously exposed to a fragrance, we do adapt to it. So changing it up is actually a beneficial way of making sure we still can enjoy it.
Pam, you are singing my song. I talk about this all the time, and to hear it from someone with a scientific background actually makes me feel like it's validated. One of the things we often talk about with the use of fragrance during this particular time is, as you said, that it's so transportive. It takes you to the place that you used to love visiting on vacation that you can't go to now. It takes you to the beach where you used to hang out in the summer. It takes you up into the mountains. So there's that sort of geographic relocation just through your senses. The other thing that's transportive or seems like a trip in itself is, as you know, fragrances are very associated with specific memories, be it your grandmother or your mother or your first date with someone or when you went to an event. So I think psychologically, one is like that vacation mode, and the other is to another time in your life that brought you a lot of pleasure. We always talk about scent related to memories. So I know this is something you have dug very deep into. And at this particular time, people also think of it as a fashion accessory, the invisible accessory, and we're all wearing sweatpants so many times of the day, they say. But if you don't mind, I would love for you to share what's the connection between scent and memory?
Well, as you've already indicated, it's extremely powerful. The connection appears to start in the brain, where the olfactory system, part of the olfactory system is actually part of our emotional memory system, the limbic system, where emotional memories are stored. And so activation of the olfactory system, particularly with a memory of an odor or fragrance that has been associated with another experience or another person, has the ability to activate that emotional system in ways that we don't think other sensory systems have the ability to do so in quite the same vivid and the same immediate way. And most people talk about odors reviving memories as being extremely emotional in the way they describe them and how it makes them feel. And let's face it, one of the first things that we experience when we smell something is whether we like it or not. So it is an emotional hedonic sense at its very basis. And for that reason, it seems to hold some special powers to retrieve memories that seem almost as vivid as the day we first experienced that.
It's so very interesting. I think if you were to think back of some memory of a person or a place or an experience that you had, you sort of draw a mental picture in your head. It takes you to that place. And does the brain work the same way when you're thinking of what it looked like, if you do that flashback, as to the scent itself? So do people how do they remember what a scent is? Do you think it's just like jogging their memory? How do you make that connection?
Well, what's interesting, Linda, is that when we smell a scent that brings back a memory, often we don't name what the fragrance or the odor that we're smelling is. Often we don't even think of it that way. So, for example, when we do studies where we present people with different odors, some of which they may have already identified as being special in their experience, very often what they will describe is not what the smell was like, but where they were or who they were with. Yeah. So, for example, when I present people with a coconut odor, their immediate association is not, oh, that's coconut, but usually, well, that smells like I was at the beach one day because of the scent of the sunscreen. Or maybe it smells like a day I spent at a tiki bar drinking pina coladas. So it's the association rather than the object of the scent itself that seems so intertwined.
I understand what you're saying. Very, very often, being in my business, and I bet being in yours, people ask me, what's your favorite scent? Or what's your favorite this? And I am like, it's like being the head of the UN. I can't like name a name or a specific fragrance because my collection is so overwhelming and exciting. And instead, I really go in the direction you were saying. This particular fragrance day, we're celebrating flowers specifically, the connection and the focus on fragrance and flowers. And it is interesting because it also connects to something else you referred to, Pam. Many people do not realize that if you think of the scent of a rose or the daffodils or whatever, it isn't necessarily that you are thinking exactly of what that scent is when you actually inhaled it, but of the memory that's associated with. Do you have anything, before we go on to some more serious subject matter, do you have any connection in your research with the world of flowers that's our focus for these couple of days?
Yes, in fact, we use a lot of the botanical scents in research, particularly when we're trying to elicit calming or relaxation. And in my own personal experience, my grandmother always had a huge garden of lilies of the valley, Muguet des Bois. And to this day, that scent brings me back to walking through and helping her weed her garden.
Wow. Okay, we're going to end our segment on a very positive note, but we need to go to a part that people are so curious about and are so interested in what you can share with them. I know that before we get to some specific questions, I just think it would be great if you could help us with the definition of some terms that we keep hearing out there. And you are such an expert, Pam. Many people during this COVID time are experiencing different levels of loss of smell. If you wouldn't mind just helping us with some of the main terminology that's being used to refer to these, people are having difficulty expressing it. And I know there are a lot of different variations. So my favorite one to want for everyone to understand, it actually has the word nose in it phonetically, is anosmia. So if you could start with that one at the top, I think it would be very helpful to the audience.
I'll be happy to try to do that because I know a lot of these terms are appearing in the news and in magazine stories on a regular basis. So to the extent I can, So anosmia is the complete inability to detect odors. Now, in very rare cases, someone may be born without a sense of smell, a condition called congenital anosmia, but that is rare. Most of the total anosmia that we find in the population is a consequence of some experience they've had, a head injury, a post-viral disorder, nasal sinus disease, or perhaps a toxic exposure. After anosmia, the next type of smell loss is called hyposmia, which is between having a normal sense of smell and total loss. It's some degree relative to your age and your health status of a loss of smell sensitivity. So it's not total, but it's something that we often experience as we age, a little bit of more hyposmia with every passing decade. The other thing that can be reported in these days, particularly post-COVID, is a condition called parosmia. Parosmia is when you can smell something, but what it smells like is different from what you formerly experienced it as. So, for example, your coffee may have a smell more like gasoline in the morning, which is going to make you really unwilling to actually drink it. And unfortunately, with parosmia, most of the time, the distortions in the percept that we experience are unpleasant rather than a shift towards pleasantness. There's also a condition called phantasmia, and this occurs fairly rarely, but when it occurs, it can be quite disconcerting. This is smelling something in the absence of any stimulus. So often people who are recovering from smell dysfunction will report smelling a bad odor when there's nothing in the environment, or will smell something burning even when there's no smoke or any reason for it. So these are the 4 different kinds of smell problems that can occur.
Are most of the ones that you referred to, and also now I know nose is not the way to say it. Let me say it with you. Anosmia?
It's very tempting to say anosmia.
I know.
Absolutely. It makes perfect sense, right?
Are most these conditions pre-COVID probably were things people looked at or were concerned about when they got a cold, when they had some kind of viral infection, or whatever was happening with them physically? If we can change the channel just a little bit and get to the specific pandemic going on now, there are different articles I've read, and you've had so much input on this and done so much research. What is your overall perspective of the connection between scent, as well as you were referring to the sense of taste, and how that is being affected at different levels within the current pandemic?
Happy to try to explain this. So basically, a huge proportion of individuals who become infected with COVID show an acute loss of their ability to smell. Now, this has very, very distressing consequences. Probably the first place where people will notice this is when they go to eat or drink something. Because when we think of flavor from a food or a beverage, flavor is comprised not only of the taste of that food or beverage on our tongue, but also the odorous molecules that differentiate different beverages or different foods. So, for example, if you've lost your sense of smell, you could put a candy that's flavored like cherry in your mouth, or a pineapple one, or a strawberry, or a grape. They're all going to taste sweet, but you're not going to be able to identify exactly what the flavor is. That's all because of the odor molecules that are no longer being perceived. Those odor molecules are the ones that travel up the back of our throat into the odor receptor area. And so that's where most people immediately recognize a smell loss, is when they go to drink their coffee or drink their orange juice or eat something, and they have taste sensation, but no other flavor differentiation.
Wow. I with many things in life during the pandemic, you don't realize how much you value something until you lose some of that. And I know this is a great concern. Another part that I think you have been researching is something that's very close to the fragrance community. We in the fragrance world have a lot of people who study to different levels for different amounts of time, actual identification of scents. So the perfumer, of course, is the most famous, and we have a lot of them featured during this program, which I know everyone is really enjoying because they're the artist and the storyteller behind it. So they spent a tremendous amount of time learning about different ingredients. We also have evaluators who make sure that the fragrances stay consistent and come out the way we want, and so on and so on and so on. And I've even had the pleasure at one of the fragrance houses of, not that I want to become a perfumer, but I just wanted to learn more. And I've been smelling all different kinds of things with someone who is very big in our industry. His name is Ron Winograd at IFF. And I'm just in love with the experience. Now, with all of that as the background in the fragrance world, we're very intent on it. But what I've been reading is for those people who lose their sense of smell, there's been suggestion by you and others that perhaps a bit of training or repetitious smelling might help them get back some level of loss, or it does something to them. So could you please share with us, Pam, what that's all about?
Yes. So what's interesting is that our olfactory system works best when it's used continuously. And so perfumers and people in the fragrance industry become more sensitive even to the differences between very similar materials with repeated exposure, where they're focusing on the perception. And there is a lot of evidence that is being accrued in the research and the clinical community to show that this type of regular training can also benefit people who have become less sensitive or who have lost their sensitivity due to problems with their sense of smell. Wow. And so we're looking at something called post-viral olfactory retraining therapy to help people bridge that gap between when they've lost their sense of smell and how to re-stimulate the system so that they may be able to regain either partly or completely their ability to smell.
Well, that's very encouraging. It sounds to me, not that I play the piano, but everyone said, how did you get to Carnegie Hall? It was through a lot of practice. So do you think for people who have a cold or are affected much more intently for something long term, if they were to train themselves to smell different things, be it coffee or fruits or whatever foods or spices are in their cupboard, they don't even have to leave the apartment or home, that it would help them recover through this memory training of the sense that they're smelling?
Absolutely. Now, again, there are no promises. One of the things that we've learned from COVID is that it may differ in some ways from other viruses that have been studied and recovery from those viruses. But it's also true that most people do seem to regain their ability to smell almost as quickly as they lost it. It's almost like a switch being turned off and then back on again. Unfortunately, it's a small percentage of people who persist in olfactory loss, but because of the sheer number of people that have been affected in this way, it's a really large number of people. And so there are many therapies that are likely to be tried over the next 6 months to a year to help people regain. But the one that is currently has shown the most promise is this regular smelling of, let's say, 4 to maybe 6 different odors on a twice daily basis. And again, there's slight differences in how everyone recommends this is done. But basically, you really need to take some time out of your day, maybe 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening, and focus on trying to smell. Even if you don't have a conscious awareness of the smell, you may remember what it smelled like, and trying to make that link between the memory in your brain and the input of these odor molecules coming into your nose in a very mindful way may actually be why it's working. And so it's harmless. There's really no risk except maybe time and a little bit of boredom. I think there can be a little bit of frustration, particularly in the early days when you may not be getting any obvious benefit from it. But there is really good evidence from a large number of studies, actually, that this can work for many people. And so it's certainly something worth trying. And there is evidence that the sooner you start it after you've lost your sense of smell, the better the outcome.
Well, that's very, very positive about the future. Pam, I could probably talk to you for the rest of today and tomorrow and never get enough information. Much of what you say is validating a lot that we read about, but you've also shared today a lot of information that I think is very interesting, important, and a top priority for people to understand in this day and age. So I just want everyone in the audience to know that in typical Fragrance Foundation tradition, we're not just talking to Pam Dalton today. We are forming an alliance with the Monell Center, and we are going to make sure that any information that they are able to share with the general public, we will share with our entire community. I know that there's going to be a time we're going to want you to come back. And, we're really grateful for your time today. I know you are so intently looking at this, and you've been looking at it way before, we hit this phase back in March. So I cannot thank you enough, Pam. You are a delight to speak to, and you're filled with such important information that we're going to make sure that we're holding hands with you for a very long time, virtually and eventually in person.
I would love to be able to come and smell things in person with you, Linda. And we really appreciate at the Monell Center the opportunity to have outlets like the Fragrance Foundation to support our research by bringing it to the attention of the general public. The work we do going into scientific journals may be important, but it's only truly groundbreaking and changing the way people react and live if we can make the general public understand the impact of our research. And we thank you for that.
It's a pleasure speaking with you today, and I'm sure we'll be doing so in the future as well. Have a great rest of the day, Pam, and thank you so very much.
Thank you.